Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Connor, and with me is Eduardo. And today we're going to be talking about the buses of tomorrow, how upcoming bus innovations are going to make buses a more viable transit option that will allow cities to enjoy the benefits of transit, including improved traffic, improved equity, and helping fight climate change. Before we get into the innovations, though, we need to talk about the buses of today and some of the issues facing them. So, what are some of the problems with today's buses? Well, the biggest one is that buses today are slow and unpredictable. And the reason for this is that they have to sit in the same traffic as cars. And also, bus networks today generally have a ton of stops. So these factors combine to make buses very slow and also unreliable. You never know when the bus is going to arrive. Additionally, in the US, there's a stigma against buses, that buses are only for the poor who have no other option. And this stigma is reinforced by the fact that buses tend to be underfunded and thus tend to be dirty and just generally unpleasant to take. Additionally, most buses today are still running on diesel, so they release a lot of CO2 emissions, especially when they're stuck sitting in traffic. So now that we've shown some of the problems, how are these innovations going to address them? Well, we're going to talk about three innovations: bus rapid transit, self-driving buses, and straddling buses. So first up are the bus rapid transit systems, or BRT lines. So these we've already talked about a little bit, but these are bus routes that have dedicated bus lanes that are separated from regular traffic. Additionally, these buses are given signal priority so that they can breeze right through intersections. And the obvious advantage of this is that these BRT buses are much faster and much more reliable than a traditional bus network. Additionally, another major component of BRT networks is that they all have dedicated stations for the buses that look kind of like subway stations but above ground. So at these stations, fares are paid before boarding the buses, which helps make boarding more efficient. There tend to be ramps that allow for floor-level boarding onto the buses as opposed to stepping up into buses like you do normally, which helps with people in wheelchairs. And additionally, BRT systems generally have much fewer stops, which helps improve efficiency. So to give an example of what this looks like, we're going to look at the Curitiba BRT system in Curitiba, Brazil. So this actually isn't something new. These were first built in the 1970s, and they were built as an alternative to a subway network just because the city was rapidly expanding and needed transit but couldn't afford a subway. And they actually found that this system was 50 times cheaper than the equivalent subway network. And as you can see in the bottom picture, these buses run on a separate lane away from the car traffic. However, it was made a true BRT system in the 90s when they gave it a renovation and built these glass stations to go along with it, these glass tubes. And as you can see in the bottom picture, they have the gate, so you pay your fares before getting on the bus, as well as the ramps to get on the bus, even if you're in a wheelchair. And this has been wildly successful. There are about 350 stations in the city today, and these have been adopted around the world as a cheaper alternative to subways. So next we're going to talk about self-driving buses, which are a bit more futuristic. So these are buses that use AI drivers instead of human drivers. So live experiments with these began in 2017, and of course with all the self-driving technology, safety is one of the biggest concerns. So the thing with these self-driving buses is that they typically tend to be smaller shuttle-style buses rather than the big ones we typically think of, like with MARTA. And many people think that these are going to be used as sort of a last mile option to expand transit rather than as a replacement for our current buses, which I'll talk about more in a minute. So to give an example of one of these systems, we're going to look at the Trapezio buses in Neuhausen-Rheinfall in Switzerland. So this one opened in 2018, and the point of it is it transports tourists from the main train station to the Rhine Falls, which is this huge waterfall near the town. It's a big tourist attraction. So the interesting thing about this bus is that it's actually already traveling with regular traffic. It does have a bunch of safety features to facilitate this. So its top speed is only about 50 miles per hour, so it's very slow and safe. And additionally, it has faster response times than a human, although a human operator is always present to take the reins just in case something does go wrong. But what's interesting about this is the vision that Bruno Schwager, the director of the program, has for self-driving buses. He said that in the future, self-driving vehicles are expected to allow routes that to date have never been covered or were unprofitable to now be operated at a reasonable cost. And essentially the vision here is that these self-driving buses aren't going to replace what we have now, Rather, they're going to be used as sort of a last mile option to allow for new routes, shorter routes into lower density areas like suburbs that will expand the reach of transit and allow more people to be able to get to those train stops. So finally, the last one we're going to look at is the most out there one. It's the straddling buses in China, or the TEB, the transit elevated buses. So these were tested in China in 2016, and the interesting thing about them is that the developers said that the traffic would be reduced by 25 to 30%. But during the testing, they found this interesting phenomena where when the bus is going over the traffic, people have a tendency to stop. When this big mothership is going over them, it kind of freaks them out and they hit the brakes, which causes traffic jam. So it's kind of unclear if this actually benefits traffic. But it's still much cheaper than a subway line. These cost about 1/10 of what a equivalent subway would cost. And the interesting thing is that these, as you can see, are much bigger than a typical bus, and they can actually replace 40 conventional buses, which reduces fuel usage and thus reduces emissions. Now, unfortunately, these tests ran into some issues. One is that figuring out how these things take corners is a big issue. As you can see, they're very big and bulky. But also, the company that ran them was shut down due to corruption. They were taking in a bunch of illegal fundraising, and a bunch of people got sent to jail. So to conclude, these free innovations will allow buses to address some of the issues that buses have been facing. They will make buses much faster and more reliable. They'll allow cities to enjoy the benefits of transit, like improving traffic, like opening up transportation to the poorest people in the city without the cost of a subway. And finally, because they are cool and innovative, they will help fight the stigma against buses. So that's what we have for you today about the buses of tomorrow. Thank you for listening.